You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I am your host, Jack Johnson. I'm going to tell you my favorite pitching prospect going into 2024, give you a list of players that you should keep or cut, and lastly, any guys on this roster that are still fixable. We're going to talk about it all coming up next on Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for tuning in to another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson. You can follow me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. And you can catch all of these episodes on wherever you get your podcast. That can be Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts, and you can catch us on YouTube. You guys continue to keep subscribing. It's been a great turnout. We continue to get more numbers and views. We continue to get more numbers and subscribers. It has been fantastic, and I thank you all for keeping this podcast going. You can always expect us to give you fun content. You can expect us to give you new content every single week. I know that sometimes we may repeat a segment here or there in the offseason because no baseball for the Royals is going on. But hopefully you do enjoy all these segments we throw at you for the next 4 to 5 months or so before things start getting ramped up in surprise around February when pitchers and catchers report. Today's episode is brought to you by Jase Medical. We'll have more coming up about them in about 10 minutes or so, but they are always a great sponsor to have, and especially for today's show when we have so much to go over. If this is your first episode ever tuning into Locked On Royals, of course, welcome in. And I'm a lifelong Royals fan, as I'm sure you are, and I work now in Kansas City at Sports Radio 810 WHB. I've got a show on ESPN Kansas City, a show on Sports Radio 810 WHB. So I stay pretty busy in the sports world. But when you come here, we are always going to be talking about the boys in blue, your Kansas City Royals. We're going to do this a few times throughout the offseason and dive into some prospects. They don't have to have played in the Arizona Fall League. They don't have to be really popping up everywhere in the social media world. They don't have to be talked about, by the Royals themselves. You don't need to look on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, stuff like that. We're just going to give you prospects that we really like. And we're going to start up top. We're going to be giving you our favorite pitching prospects, favorite hitting prospects. Then we'll get into some underrated guys we think can make it to Kansas City next year, because I'm sure for a lot of you, that is important. When you have a Royals team that doesn't have much depth, not a lot of young talent, at least at the minor league level, you want to know something about this system. You want to know some of these guys. You want to have names in the back of your head so that when the Royals get to spring training, you're not caught off guard by who's that guy that just came into the game? What do we know about that guy? My goal is to keep you as informed as possible. I want to give you these guys' names, their numbers, where they came from, so that when they debut in Kansas City, you're going to know them easily. You're not going to have to go to Google, Wikipedia, MLB.com, minorleaguebaseball.com to find all the info. You can just come right here to Locked On Royals. One thing about this farm system is that it's in dire straits right now. It's a very barren farm system. Let's not try to inflate it to what it's not. Let's not try to pump it up to a level that doesn't really need to be, put at this point in time. To me, though, there are guys in the Royals farm system that are going to be big leaguers, and I think pretty good ones at that. Now, it's always a crapshoot, I would say, when you're looking at minor leaguers, because they can have really good numbers in AA, AAA, and never cut it at the big league level. I think Jackson Kowar is a perfect example. He had great numbers in AA, great numbers in AAA before he debuted, and then it didn't really become anything. He just could not make that transition. So it's always a crapshoot. Just because I say it doesn't mean it's going to come true. I hope it comes true. But at the end of the day, it's just trusting your gut. And a guy that I'm trusting my gut with right now is Mason Barnett. Mason Barnett, at this point in time, is my favorite pitching prospect of the Kansas City Royals. Now, if you're not as aware about Mason Barnett, he was a guy that was in that Gavin Cross draft class that I thought slipped under the radar a little bit. He wasn't a 7th or an 8th rounder. He was a 3rd rounder out of Auburn. But the numbers didn't really pop to me. I wondered what the Royals saw in him. Why are you using a 3rd round pick on a guy that didn't have, great stuff, lights out stuff, a low ERA, high K numbers? Why does this just kind of feel like a very whelming pick? Well, the Royals saw something in him, and I think it translated pretty damn well to the minor league level. You go over his first full year of professional ball. So we go to 2023. He began the year in Quad Cities. He made 16 starts there, had a 3.18 ERA. He struck out over 10 guys per 9. His whip was below league average and got the promotion near the end of the year to AA Northwest Arkansas and didn't really miss a beat at that point. Made 7 starts there, 32 2/3 innings pitched, 43 Ks. So his K numbers boosted a little bit and his walk number went down. His whip increased just a little bit, more competition. I'll always say AA is where the most talent is in the minor league level, but he really did not miss a beat. And that was one thing I wanted to see from Mason Barnett. Is it just you being a college pitcher dominating at a high level where you might be older than a lot of the guys you're facing? I wanted to see that transition. And him and Javier Vaz, who right now is my favorite hitting prospect in the Royals system, they did the exact same thing. Tore it up in high A and then went to AA and didn't really miss a beat. Mason Barnett, to me, is a guy that is elevating quickly in this system. And 7 starts, at least at the tail end of the year, it's not that small of a sample size. I believe he'll begin next year in AA Northwest Arkansas, and the hope is that you get him to AAA Omaha by June. He gets a pretty good workload. Numbers stay the same, if not boost up a little bit. And you can get that promotion to AAA Omaha where maybe he makes, 5, 6, 7, maybe 8 starts. And you could try to get him to Kansas City depending on your rotation. I mean, right now, when you look at the Royals' top 30 guys, there's some I don't really agree with because Mason Barnett is 12th in the system and Javi Vaz is 13th. I think they are much better than where the Royals have them ranked right now, or at least MLB.com has them ranked at this point in time. But Mason Barnett is a fast riser. And to me, his stuff is starting to play a little bit more. I think Preston Farr, Royals Miners on Twitter, did a fantastic job covering him. And really, I took interest in him because of Preston. So be sure to give him a look on Twitter at Royals Miners. But I'm thinking that his stuff can play at the big league level because there's a lot to work with. I think it's a really good starter's frame. He's got that. He's a bigger body, very smooth and repeatable delivery. That sounds like a bunch of just baseball junk talk. But really, when you break it down and you get to the science part of it, that is important. I think there's a big reason, and you've heard us bring up Asa Lacy's name a lot. I truly believe his lack of health, his lack of durability is due to having an unrepeatable, windup, an unrepeatable delivery. It strains the back, it strains the shoulder. But when you're smooth, when you have a repeatable thing, you can be durable. You can be healthy. And so far, it's been a pretty healthy, first couple of years for Mason Barnett at the minor league level. And that's why I'm going into 2023 having this expectation that we're going to see him at some point. There is just not a lot of depth between AA and AAA right now. So there is still a chance. I don't think the Royals would, but there's a chance by like May, Mason Barnett can get that bump. The Royals may want to take things slowly because keep in mind, too, if the Royals add a couple of pieces of the rotation in the offseason, they trade a few guys to bolster that group, then there's going to be no need to rush them. Now, if the Royals add 3 names of the rotation, you keep Singer and Reagans, well, then, yeah, have them spend the first half of the year in AA. But I think the Royals need a guy right now that you're just kind of waiting for to get to the big league level. You're waiting to when that rotation gets a little bit weak, and then you're calling for a guy like Mason Barnett. I believe he's rated too low in the MLB top 30 prospect ranks for the Royals. I think he's much better than people are giving him credit for. He doesn't have the overpowering stuff. He doesn't throw triple digits, anything like that. but I believe he's got a lot to work with. Good frame, good delivery, good amount of pitches as well. And I think his stuff translated very well from high A Quad Cities to Double A Northwest Arkansas. And I expect, just a gut feeling I have, that stuff's going to play in Triple A. And I think that stuff is going to play at the big league level. He, to me, kind of feels like one of those hits in the 2022 draft class. If it means Gavin Cross isn't one of those guys making it and succeeding in Kansas City, well, I'm surely hoping that guys like Caden Walls, who were taken second, Mason Barnett, who was taken third, and Javier Vaz, who was taken much later, I believe in the 15th round, can be guys that can make a big-time impact in Kansas City. All right, the next thing we're going to dive into is with this current group in Kansas City. Who are some guys that you keep? Who are some guys that you cut? I'm going to give you a list of 5 guys and whether the Royals should keep or cut them. That's coming up next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. You can follow me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. Before we go any further, let's give a shout out to today's title sponsor in Jase Medical. Modern medical care and treatment are important, but our global supply chains are fragile. Things like pandemics, natural disasters, and foreign travel may cut you off from the treatment you need. Jase Medical is your solution. Just fill out their online form and one of Jase Medical's board-certified physicians will review it to determine whether medications are safe and appropriate. Then Jase will send your prescriptions to one of their partner pharmacies where your order will be filled and mailed directly to your home. You can also send your physician a message for answers to treatment-related questions anytime. Everyone should be empowered to care for themselves and their loved ones during the unexpected. That's why Jase Medical offers the Jase case. Save more than $360 by getting these life-saving antibiotics with Jase Medical Plus, an additional $20 off by using my code LOCKEDON at checkout on jasemedical.com. That's JASE medical.com. You know, it's such a unique and I don't want to say roster crunch off season. You've heard me say unique a lot, and I try to prevent myself from using it over and over again, but sometimes it's like my tick word. I just go to it. Unique is something I use to describe the Royals a lot, but maybe in the end it's not as unique as I'm letting on. But I do strongly believe the Royals are entering a roster crunch situation, not because they have a loaded group. There's talent everywhere. They just can't get innings or at bats for certain guys. It's because they have a lot of in-betweeners, I would say. And when you have in-betweeners and you're kind of in an in-between spot in your rebuild, it's more of what do you do? Now, what is the plan here? You know, last year it felt like Ryan O'Hearn was an immediate cut. Don't even give him a chance. But we saw Ryan O'Hearn catch on, and tonight he is starting and in the middle of the lineup for an Orioles team on the brink of elimination. They saw something in him. So that's kind of the gamble you take, is if you move on from some of these guys, they may catch on. And it felt like more often than not this year, guys caught on somewhere. You know, Whit Merrifield found himself again after struggling that last year in Kansas City. Jorge Soler found himself again. Yoel Payamps became the best version of himself. You know, guys just found success. So the Royals need to be careful about certain guys on the roster. You know, I think a perfect example is a Colin Snyder or a Jackson Kowar. And those are going to be the first 2 guys in this keeper cut segment. Jackson Kowar has the stuff. I don't think that can be denied. He's got the stuff, and it can play at the big league level. But he gets hit too often, and when he's really struggling, he's got no command. Somebody could work with that. The Dodgers could work with that. The Rays could work with that. But the Royals need to figure out, can they work with it? Can they afford to give Jackson Kowar another chance? Do they feel like there's anything worth fixing? And we're going to talk about who is fixable on this team later on in the show. But the Royals are going to enter this spot in the offseason where I kind of feel like it's do or die. Did you get enough in September from Jackson Kowar to keep him on the 40-man roster? I am going to go ahead and say for now, Jackson Kowar is a cut. I think he is a guy you remove from the 40-man roster. Keep your fingers crossed that he clears waivers and you can put him back in AAA Omaha. And maybe down the road, he gets another chance in the bullpen. I just feel like you need to try to revamp this bullpen. And the only way you do that is by giving guys who can get outs, have shown you they've given you outs, and also going out to other outlets, free agency, trades, to build this bullpen to be much better than it was. If Jackson Kowar showed at the end of September that he could finish pretty strong, maybe I'm giving him a different look. But for now, I'm going to have to say he's a guy that you remove from this 40-man roster. There just wasn't enough put together in the end. I was hopeful for him. We did a podcast episode on him. I just don't know if there really is enough at this point. He can always catch on elsewhere, but it's the roll of the dice you take. Maybe he does. Maybe he doesn't. Now for Colin Snyder, I do think that he's somebody you keep. Because if that stuff can be fine-tuned a little bit, if that sinker can really be worked with, then you have a legitimate middle relief type of guy. You know, if his sinker can play at 96, 97, you don't get rid of that just on a whim. I thought he got a lot better in the second half. He was a lost cause at one point. I thought he got a hell of a lot better in the second half. And we saw that Mac Quatrero trusted him in big-time moments. So the Royals may look at him and go, that's something we could work with. If he goes elsewhere and they fine-tune that, that is a nearly unhittable guy. Because a sinker thrown that hard and located right, it's just a ground ball machine. And not hard ground balls. I mean, it's soft contact. We saw Colin Snyder at the beginning of 2022 have that value. I think there's still something in there. But it's going to take a lot of work in the offseason. For now, I keep him on the 40-man roster. The third guy I have here is Edward Olivares, keeper cut. I think he did enough offensively. Again, in the second half, he was one of those second-half surge guys that you should keep him. I don't think the Royals remove him from the 40-man roster. Here's where it gets interesting. I'm not opposed to a trade. I have heard that floated around on Twitter a lot from Royals fans saying, well, this is when you capitalize. I think a perfect destination is the San Francisco Giants. Gabe Kapler no longer there. They've got a ton of pitching. Edward Olivares is a hitter. He's not a great fielder, so maybe that doesn't play well in the Bay Area. But they need bats. And they need bats that are under control for a few more years. Eddie O is exactly that. And when the Giants have pitching, that makes a lot of sense to me. So I'm going to put him on that middle line almost. You keep him, yes. You don't DFA him. But keep him until you trade him, I guess would be my best example to go with here. The fourth guy I have on my list is Kris Bubic. This is going to be something to watch here. Kris Bubic, I think, was one of my favorite guys to watch in April because he showed that with good coaching, working in the offseason with a new pitch, he could kind of be that guy that Royals fans allude to when saying if Brian Sweeney was good at his job or not. And I remember the Royals broadcast saying the first thing they did when evaluating pitching coaches was they give them a pitcher and go, tell us what's wrong. First thing Brian Sweeney said, why doesn't he have a slider? He throws that slider first couple starts of the year. He looks great, had that 7 shutout inning performance against the Giants. And then, of course, he gets hurt in that start against the Braves. Tommy John, season over. My fear is that Kris Bubic can't get back to even that level. And the majority of his career is one that has been largely unimpressive. I think there's something in there. I really do. I don't want to move on from a guy like Kris Bubic because I think he's young enough. I think he's got the stuff and he's coachable to keep. The fear is Tommy John can derail a player. And when they aren't really that good to begin with, how big is the climb back up? It's a pretty big one for Kris Bubic. I think it's more so you have to gauge how this rehab goes. If it starts to get a little bit hazy, a little bit dicey, maybe you do move on. But for now, I believe there's still a little bit left in the tank for Kris Bubic, so I'm going to keep him on this roster. And then I go one last spot here for a positional player. And it's one that I think might be a little bit controversial, but maybe in the end, it really isn't that controversial. And it's going to be a guy like Kyle Isbell. I am just so torn on Kyle Isbell. And the reason I think Drew Waters' spot is a little bit safer, he's younger. He had an oblique injury coming out of spring training. I feel like when they traded for him, they viewed him as a future center fielder. Kyle Isbell is better defensively. And I think he played well enough in the second half to warrant that spot. J.J. Picollo said that was one of the things in the evaluation year. They wanted to see if he could play center field. However, does that mean he's an everyday center fielder? You can play center field, but not be an everyday center fielder. I think for now I might have a cop-out answer and put him exactly where I put Edward Olivares. I think there's value there. Michael A. Taylor had value, and the Royals got 2 bullpen arms out of him. Maybe you can get a little bit more for Kyle Isbell. Now, the Royals could look at him and say, we want to be the everyday center fielder. He's good enough defensively, just need to be a little bit better offensively. That kind of, to me, feels like where they're leaning. So maybe for now I lean a little bit more towards keep, but it would not shock me if they traded. So really the only guy I said to cut was Jackson Kowar. I said to keep Colin Snyder, trade Edward Olivares, keep Chris Bubich. Maybe I should have thrown in an additional guy to cut, but this is not the last time we're going to do that segment. Wanted to start off a little bit easy. We're going to go down the list in these coming weeks and pick some more guys that are probably more so on the cut side. Could be on that 50-50 line right now. Just want a little bit more time to digest it and think about it. All right, the last thing we're going to dive into is who on this roster is truly fixable. We brought up Ryan O'Hearn, and at one point felt like he was a lost cause. Then the Orioles fixed him. Is there anybody on the Royals roster right now that can bounce back like that? I'll tell you if there is next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. You can follow me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. Before we go any further, let's give a shout out to the other title sponsor today in FanDuel. October baseball is back, and you can make your postseason debut with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Join FanDuel today, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to create your new account. Then you can get in on the action from the first pitch until the final out. Bet on everything from strikeouts to home runs to who will win the game. And if you don't want to wait the whole game to get a W, predict what will happen in the next at-bat with quick bets. So head on over to FanDuel.com/lockedon right now. Step up to the plate this postseason with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. And that should be pretty fun because things are getting interesting between the Phillies and the Braves. Man, the D-backs have the Dodgers on the brink of elimination, as well as the Rangers have the Orioles on the brink of elimination. And we'll talk some postseason baseball, I think, as the week concludes. Might have a couple questions thrown my way in Mailbag Friday, but still a ways to go until then. What I wanted to wrap up the show with today is give you a few guys that I feel like are truly fixable, that did not have good years in Kansas City in 2023, but I think can bounce back with a full spring training, a full offseason workout, and working with the coaches nonstop. Because that's what it's going to take for some of these guys. It can't be a scenario in which you show up in February. Oh, it's spring training. I just need a full spring training. It's going to take from start to finish, probably beginning shortly after Christmas, if not before that. I mean, I don't really have a true timeline for you. To me, the first guy that is just primed to be fixed, I mean, truly, is Brady Singer. I think that with a full offseason, a workout plan, working with Brian Sweeney, fine-tuning the changeup, and no WBC to worry about, no, other conflicts to worry about, he is somebody that can return to 2022 form. I truly believe that. If you can build him up in spring training, it's almost one I would place a lot of money on. Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe I'm too optimistic. But I feel like he's one of those guys that can bounce back like that. He's already shown at the big league level he can be a very good pitcher. Velo was down. Maybe he was fatigued. Maybe it was injury related. But if you get him to surprise healthy and he gets a full amount of starts, and surprise. I think you're going to see a very good version of Brady Singer early on. I don't think you're going to see the valleys that we saw in 2023. I really don't. And if he pitches well enough in the first half, maybe that's when you can flip it. You take advantage of when his value's at his highest. He's not under contract. He's got a couple years of control left, and somebody else would be willing to give up a handful of prospects for him. That, to me, feels like somebody that can be fixed, is very fixable, and I would put a lot of money on to say that he is the most fixable guy on the 26-man roster. The second guy that I'm really not that worried about, I think is going to have a pretty good 2024, and once again is going to be a strong trade candidate at the deadline. It's Carlos Hernandez. I think Carlos Hernandez had a good year, and that's going to come off as maybe arrogant on my end. That's going to come off a little bit sour to those listening. But we had never seen Carlos Hernandez put together a really good year. I think 2021 was his best because he started a little bit. But in the end, I don't think we ever viewed him as a long-term starter. This, to me, showed that he could be a lights-out reliever. He was so good in the first half. I mean, he was my closer of the future before James MacArthur kind of took that role. But when your stuff is that good, I think there are certain things you can work on. I don't know if Carlos Hernandez envisioned himself being in that type of role going into the year. I think when he was overperforming, it was because he was somebody nobody expected a lot from. But if you put him in a smaller leverage role, I think the stuff is going to be very good. The Royals still value him. He's going to be one of the better relievers in that bullpen. Certainly has the best stuff in the bullpen, but it's just got to be a little bit better located like it was in the first half. Second half, he lost it a bit. And when he has an outing go south, it can't be 5, 6, 7 runs. It's got to be 1. If you're going to be a great back-end reliever, you can't have things snowball like that. But to me, when you have that stuff, it's fixable. It really is. That's not a concern for me. I think it is very fixable. So 2 pitchers that I have in this list of 3. Brady Singer, I would bet a lot of money on. Carlos Hernandez, not a ton, but he's a reliever, and he throws really hard, and he's got a really good secondary pitch. That I'm going to work with. The third guy here, I think, is going to be a Captain Obvious statement. It's going to be maybe a boring pick, but I also think it's how they utilize him. It's Salvador Perez for me. I think his flaws this year were very much due to injury. I think if he DHs a lot more in 2024, you're going to get a 2021 version of Salvador Perez. And I know that he was in my bold takes of maybe moving on from him, but it's a bold take for a reason, right? It's not likely to happen. You're just kind of sticking your neck out there like I did. Salvador Perez, though, is still a very good offensive talent. He's got the most raw power, I would say, of anybody in the lineup, and that's not really a sexy take. That's a pretty obvious take. I just feel like if he can stay healthy, he DHs the way Mike Matheny DH'd him in 2021, he's going to get back to a better version of himself. And there is a wide open spot for him to DH, or he can catch, right? He can catch, and maybe Freddie Fermin catches 50% of the time, or 60%, or 70% for all I care. But you have to get him off his feet more. If he starts to get banged up more, then it is a lost cause at that point because you can't fix what's always broken. And Salvador Perez, to me, is a guy that is shown, when healthy, when rolling, he is a very important middle-of-the-lineup bat for the Royals. He's the face of the franchise. He has been for 10 years. Now, Bobby Witt Jr. has kind of taken him from that, but over the course of a decade, it's been him. Salvi is a guy that everybody recognizes. Now, Bobby Witt Jr. is likely going to take that role, maybe as early as next year. But if Salvi's in this lineup, got to get him off his feet more. Not worried about his approach. He's always going to be a free swinger. But if he's healthy, he's not dealing with nagging injuries, I think we'll get a better version of Salvador Perez back in Kansas City. Well, that's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. Always follow me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. And catch these podcasting episodes on wherever you get your podcasts. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast, and on YouTube. And as always, be sure to hit that subscribe button. But until tomorrow morning, you take it easy, Kansas City.